Earlier you said there's no Bible verses that say that we're saved by faith alone.
No, there is one Bible verse talks about faith alone.
Which one is that?
It's James 2:24. You're saved by works and not by faith alone.
Okay,
That's
so
the only place in the whole Bible. Yeah.
Except for Ephesians 2:8 and 9.
It's not except from anywhere else. Yeah.
Do you know Ephesians 2:8 and 9?
Oh, go ahead.
By grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast.
Yeah, and of course I agree with that totally, but James 2:24 is you're saved by works and not by faith alone. And Abraham and what's her name, Rahab, it's right there it says they were saved by works. So that contradicts with what you said. And I agree with what you said, by the way.
Does James teach we've got to work our way to heaven and we're not saved by faith alone? Is it true that the only verse in the Bible that indicates that faith alone saves? Well, let's take a look at, what's that hermeneutical word? Context. James chapter 2 and verse 24, you see, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. I'm biting my nails, so concerned that Protestant Christianity of grace alone, faith alone, and Christ alone is wrong. Not. Context always clears up the confusion. Just look at the verses surrounding your verse in question, and you will always have resolution. Let's do that, shall we? James chapter 2 and verse 21, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? Hey, Friel, you're actually backsliding. That seems to support we've got to work to get to heaven. Hold on. This is verse 21. Verse 24 says that we're not saved by faith alone. Let's take a look at the verses in between, shall we? James chapter 2 and verses 22 and 23. You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. Whoop! There it is. Abraham was a friend of God. How? He had righteousness credited, imputed to him. By working? No, by believing in God. Period. Now let's just go back a wee little bit. You see that faith, this faith that was credited to him as righteousness, to be made a friend of God, was active along with his works. We are clearly saved by faith alone, but a faith that is genuine doesn't stand alone. It demonstrates that it is valid by doing works. The works don't save. The works demonstrate we are saved. Context makes it clear. And if you really wanted to pin down a Roman Catholic who would say, there is a verse that says that we're not saved by faith alone, show them the rest of the context of James chapter 2. Let's do that, shall we? James chapter 2 and verse 14. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? What is this? This is a description of genuine saving faith. It shows itself. Genuine faith works out. The faith that is real demonstrates itself in obedience, in sanctification, in serving, in giving, in doing, and evangelizing. Those activities don't save. They simply demonstrate that you are saved. More verses that tell us that. James chapter 2, verse 17. So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. Could it be any more clear? A false faith, ho-hum, no works. Genuine saving faith, it exhibits itself in works. Wait. There are more verses, James chapter 2 and verses 18 and 19. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Well, show me your faith apart from your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Demons believe in God, if you will. Do they love him? Do they serve him? Do they give money to the local church? No. Why? Because they don't have genuine saving faith. And somebody who says, I believe in Jesus, but there are no works that accompany that profession of faith, they simply reveal it is a false profession. I'm sorry. There's more verses. James chapter 2 and verse 20. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Bang, bang, bang. The context is making it clear. Genuine salvific faith is never an island. Genuine saving faith, the type of faith that Abraham had, which guaranteed that he'd be counted a friend of God because righteousness was credited to him, was a believing faith that demonstrated its validity by working. Now that we have seen all of the preceding verses, let's run through the verses that Clarence tried to pluck out of context to hammer Protestants into believing, well, you got to do some works to get to heaven too. James chapter 2 and verse 21. Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see, faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by its works. The scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, it was credited to him as righteousness, and therefore he was called a friend of God. You see, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Clarence, stop taking verses out of context. And if you are not persuaded that we are saved by faith alone, you will be next on Wretched.
Important dates in Christian history. 405 AD. After 23 years of work, translating from Hebrew and Greek manuscripts, Jerome completes the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible that becomes a standard for the next 1,000 years.
Welcome back to Wretched. If you are not thoroughly convinced that we are saved by faith alone, prepare yourself for drubbing the analogy of Scripture, a Reformation hermeneutical principle. When you read a verse that might be a little bit unclear, you scour through the rest of the Bible looking for clearer verses that will help you to understand the unclear. In other words, the clear reveals the unclear. If you have any sort of confusion about, well, in James chapter 2, it seems to say that Abraham wasn't saved by faith alone. Well, if context didn't persuade you he was, then apply the analogy of Scripture. Go looking for other verses that talk about being justified by faith alone. Lo and behold, in this instance, we have Romans chapter 4, which is a thorough drubbing against the idea you can work your way to heaven. James chapter 2 cites Abraham not being saved by faith alone because he was willing to sacrifice his son. The rest of the context informs us, no, he was just showing you what real saving faith looks like. You are saved by faith alone. Abraham believed in God. It was credited to him as righteousness, and he was counted a friend of God by faith alone. But it was a faith that demonstrated itself in works. The context, another hermeneutical principle of James chapter 2, makes that verse clear, but Romans 4 makes it crystal clear when it goes about the business of talking about our old friend Abraham. Romans chapter 4 and verse 2, for if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. Wow, this is clear. Abraham was not justified by works, Clarence. He was justified by faith. This crystal clear verse, it removes any fog of confusion that somebody might have if they pluck James chapter 2, verse 24 out of context. Hold on. Romans 4 doesn't stop. Verse 3. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God. It was credited to him as righteousness. Abraham was saved by faith. It was credited him by righteousness because he believed in God. Verse 4 of Romans chapter 4. Now to the one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, but as what is due. In other words, if you can do anything to earn your way to heaven, you get credit. That ain't how it works. God is going to get all the credit for saving sinners. If you work your way there, it's like receiving a paycheck for a day's labor. But that's not how Christianity works. Jesus paid it all because he did all the work and he gets all the credit. And if we get to work to get there, he's not going to get all the glory he deserves. Wait, Romans chapter 4 continues. Verse 5, but to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. Romans 4, crystal clear, illuminating perhaps any confusion in James chapter 2. Romans 4, verse 6, just as David also speaks of the blessing of the man to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. The clear illuminating the unclear. Verse 7. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds have been forgiven and whose sins have been covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will not take into account. On and on and on goes Romans chapter 4, gladly, happily, cheerily announcing with a great deal of repetition and saying the same thing over and over again redundantly to make it clear for you, your works, they're filthy rags. You can be saved by grace alone. But Romans 4 isn't done. This is verse 9. Is this blessing then on the circumcised or on the uncircumcised also? For we say faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness. Abraham's circumcision, or in the New Testament case for some, baptism, doesn't save. Works don't save. Abraham was saved by faith alone. And verse 10, how then was it credited? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. To those who might say, well, you got to obey that law to get saved. You got to do that circumcision thing to get saved. Abraham was saved before he got circumcised. So out goes that argument, Romans chapter 4. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised, so that he might be the father of all who believe without being circumcised, that righteousness might be credited to them. No, it's not done yet. Romans chapter 4, verse 12. And the father of circumcision, to whom not only are of the circumcision, but who also follow in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had while uncircumcised. And verse 13, for the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the world was not through works, but through the righteousness of faith. Verse 14, for if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void, and the promise is nullified, for the law brings about wrath. But where there is no law, there is also no violation. Verse 16, for this reason it is by faith, in order that it may be in accordance with grace, so that the promise will be guaranteed to all the descendants, not only to those who are of the law, Jewish people, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Context makes it clear, and so does the analogy of Scripture. We are not saved by works. We are saved by faith alone, which reveals itself in works. if and you have been striving, trying to earn salvation by working your way there, abandon that sinking ship and join the family of God by joining in the faith of Abraham, who believed in faith alone. Hello, Maria. This is Todd Friel from your auto insurance company, noticing you're not taking advantage of any of our life insurance policies. Really? Oh, really? You're not afraid to die? That's funny. Listen to this clip from Paul Washer.
I'm talking about you.
So what do you think of that, Maria?